All right, let's begin. Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. We hope your day started well. My name's Gay, and together with my colleagues Naomi and Gabriella, we are orchestrating the Community of Practice for Healthy Communities initiative, and we're very excited to be back with you today as we enjoy the final days of fall to host this conversation that feels so timely and so relevant. And we're very pleased to have Jerry hosting and two guest projects joining us as well. Before we start, I'd like to go over a few friendly Zoom reminders. This session is available in English and French, so you can access the French interpretation. You'll see a little globe at the bottom of your screen. You can click on that globe and you'll switch to the French channel and you'll be able to follow us in French. Closed captions are also available in English by clicking the closed captions option at the bottom of your screen. With the purpose of making this session as interactive as possible, we'll share with you through the chat an open note-taking document where we can all collaborate. This document's a space for you to share information about the projects you're working on, share questions and challenges that you're working on, capture and share any references that may be mentioned during the conversation that you'd like to go back to later, and share notes on today's session in case you want to come back to the conversation. So that is going to be shared in the chat right now. And also to warm up this virtual room where we're all finding ourselves today, we'd like to invite you to share through the Zoom chat your name and where you're joining from. We want to open this space by recognizing the ongoing impacts of colonization and the fact that reconciliation is an ongoing commitment for all of us. We're grateful to have the opportunity to live, congregate, learn, and work in the community on this territory. And as community builders, we commit to taking care of the land and the beings with whom we share it. I work and live on the unceded and unsurrendered territory of the Coast Salish peoples, Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Musqueam nations, whose relationship with the land continues to this day. Vancouver is on the Pacific coast. CUI's work happens across Turtle Island, which has traditionally been and is home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. Thanks for sharing and saying hello in the chat there. It's great to see everyone joining. Today, we're absolutely delighted to open this session about collaboration for change and impact. As I said, it's hosted by one of our Healthy Communities Initiative partners, Jerry Koh, and we have two guest projects joining. Many of you have joined us for Mobilizer Sessions in the past. And today I'd just like to take a teensy bit of time at the beginning because it just seems like the right moment to share a little bit about the story about how this $60 million Government of Canada funding program was able to fund over 1,000 projects coast to coast in the context of collaboration. It began with the Government of Canada making a very brave decision during the pandemic that the fastest way to reach all different kinds of communities, including and especially communities disproportionately affected by COVID-19, with funding to transform their public spaces, improve mobility options, and find innovative digital solutions, that the best way was to partner with a not-for-profit who would have experience in working in communities. Distributing a pan-Canadian funding program during a time of emergency created a moment of action and goodwill. Community Foundations of Canada had an incredible network of established foundations already across Canada, and the Canadian Urban Institute had an expertise for convening policymakers, urban professionals, placemaking organizations to build better, more inclusive communities for all. So the urgency of the situation brought us all together along with 9 other partner organizations, including Park People, Vivre en Ville, 880 Cities, J. Pitter Placemaking, the National Association of Friendship Centers, and more, including Jerry, who is hosting today. And this isn't the first session he's hosted. Most of the sessions we bring to you, our mob sessions, are hosted by our partners. All of us work together with Community Foundations of Canada leading to design and implement this Healthy Communities initiative funded by the Government of Canada. As you can imagine, it's not easy to work with so many partners, and managing partnerships is my responsibility, so I can say this firsthand and still with a smile. Creating clear communications, building trust, understanding one another's capacities, having clear paths of who's doing what, and making sure everyone has a vital role. In addition, for us, we were experimenting with new ideas, working to support one another. And all of this happened over Zoom because we didn't have an opportunity to meet with one another for 18 months. And some of our partners we have never met in person. But because of our partnerships and all of us working together, the phone calls, the Zoom meetings, the messages, this initiative has reached more people who needed it, has supported new applicants, has mentored projects, has held equity to be core, and has accomplished more than any one of our organizations could have individually. And that's what this session is all about. Ours is just one example of an emergency response effort that many public institutions and communities throughout the pandemic have made. We've experienced an unprecedented level of collaboration across different organizations and sectors. So how can we ensure that these efforts continue beyond the collaborative emergency response and build longer-term strategic partnerships? Why is collaboration across entities important to support local communities to thrive? And how should collaboration opportunities be approached to best meet your project needs? In today's session, we want to reflect on collaboration approaches and to identify ways for moving forward toward a deeper level of collaboration. So no matter where your organization finds itself on the journey of collaboration, we'll offer some tips for building lasting and meaningful relationships. Today's session, led by Jerry, he is an expert in building coalitions for change. We have certainly very much benefited from his insights and expertise. Jerry has worked with diverse stakeholders, municipalities, community organizations, ventures, and he's also a partner and mentor of the Healthy Communities Initiative. And together with Jerry, today we have Sahar, who's the director of the East Scarborough storefront, and she brings extensive experience working in the not-for-profit sector with a strong focus in equity and inclusion. Aside from the storefront, sports courts and Sky O'Swale are for our project. Sahar will share their COVID recovery efforts, experiences, and working systemically with employment agencies and food systems in Scarborough. Sandy is a senior project manager at UBC, and she is part of UBC's Remote Communities Drone Transport Initiative, DTI, a project that aims to test the feasibility of new medical transportation systems that use drones to deliver healthcare supplies. Sandy will share their learnings and experiences collaborating with Stalat First Nations, as well as other institutional partners. You can find the link to their website and pages in the shared document. And I think this is all from our side for now. So over to you, Jerry.
Thank you. Oh, I'm very excited to have two amazing guests today and share with us their experiences in building trusting relationships that drove and helped drive their work, and that helped result in the success that they are seeing today. And so without further ado, let me first start off by sharing the screen. This is always a little bit of an adventure to figure out if I'm sharing the right thing. So someone tell me if I'm sharing the wrong thing. All right, there you go. Yeah, so really happy for everyone to be joining us today. We, as we just mentioned a little bit earlier by Gay, our two amazing guests today are going to talk to us about the experience of building partnerships through COVID-19 and some of their own reflections on how collaboration was important and how it helped, and of course some tips about building relationships. I'll start off with just setting the tone a little bit. I think first and foremost, collaboration today, given the kind of problems and challenges that we're all trying to address, collaboration really isn't optional anymore. In fact, it is really quite crucial. I was fortunate enough to work with Gay and her team to support a number of different organizations. And I feel confident in saying that today, none of us can really be working on our mission alone if we truly want to change lives for the better. And that said, we can still look at collaboration from a couple of different angles. That very often we collaborate because it is crucial to our mission or the survival of our organization. Sometimes we collaborate because we need partners to help us grow, to expand our delivery, to serve our clients better. Sometimes we're doing it because there are deeply rooted wicked systemic problems that simply can't be solved by any single organization, even if you're the government of Canada, which is why the government of Canada partner with CFC and CUI to deliver this program. And finally, we also need collaboration to address emerging issues that in particular have very little information, people have very little understanding and have very little agreement on this, especially when we need to do this. And we're seeing this across the board, the partners, the projects in this program, people working across all these. And what makes it particularly frustrating, of course, right, working on the kind of problems that we do is oftentimes you only see a little bit of the problem, just like the proverbial iceberg, right? And when you only see a little bit of the problem, either we get very worried and scared because we think we know something is underneath and submerged, but we have no idea what's there and we don't know how to understand it, or we choose to ignore it and just go right through it, just attack the portion that we can see and hope for the best, and along with that, we see a number of different important barriers to successful collaboration. That very often there's a sense that, hey, you know what? If it's something that was not invented by my organization in my geography in my community, it's not worth looking at, or it's something that we came up with. We need to hold on to it. If we give it away, we're going to lose our advantage. And there's also this attitude of it's too hard to find the right partner and build the right relationship. I have no time to do this. And of course, there's also just the simple lack of technical ability to collaborate, not knowing how to do this. And for me, the most important one is trust issues. If it's hard enough to find someone you love and trust wholeheartedly. Imagine trying to marry two or more organizations together to do amazing work together. While the promise is there, it's very easy to lose your trust in the process as well. So despite all these barriers, we still see many organizations wanting to collaborate. And and very often collaborating in some very interesting specific area. Many of you might be familiar with this. This is a different abstraction of the iceberg metaphor put together by Kanye and Kramer from FSG. And this talks to what's the kind of things that you need to change in order to bring about lasting systems change. And so when you look at the kind of changes that many of us are working on, really the kind of change that's practical for us to do typically happens only at the top layer. When you're trying to change a series of events, a pattern that's emerging. So for example, when I was working on youth employment, the predominant thinking on how to improve youth employment was, simply put, because youth were failing at their interviews or they couldn't find jobs, let's fix the youth by helping them figure out where to look for jobs and preparing them for interviews. But that didn't really solve the problems because there were much more underlying structural issues. So, for example, the way that employers themselves were hiring people, the attitude that they got, which was, oh, I want the cream of the crop. Wait, you are trying to hire entry-level people and you're paying basically just above minimum wage, like $15 an hour or less, and you want the cream of the crop. Why? And you wonder why some employers anyway, right, can't fill their positions. And so it sort of flows downward this way, right? And also, employment service providers, when they say, good, we want to help employers hire young people, but we don't know how to prepare them because many employers will say, oh, no, this information about how we're going to do the interview, that's top secret. We can't share that with you. Well, if you can't share it with us, how are we going to be able to prepare our young people for the job? And so some of us are trying to fix problem at that level, but even that level is not good enough. You kind of have to go even deeper. What's the underlying sort of relationships, power dynamics that drives everything above it? Right? And so some of us are working at that level. Some of us are looking into, if I carry on the metaphor, the same idea, the projects around youth employment. When we look at how funders, foundations, and governments fund employment programs, despite all the emphasis on value-based funding, etc. By and large, governments and foundations often are still only funding bums and seats. You get more guaranteed payment if you make sure that people come into your programs. You get way less if you successfully place someone, because once you place someone successfully, they're not in your training program anymore. And so you don't get paid for them anymore, right? So that sort of weird sort of relationships, how it drives all these behaviors. And then most fundamentally, though, mental models trying to collaborate at that level is probably the most important because it's the hardest to change. And again, with youth employment, we've heard it so many times, what I began with, so much of the youth employment sector, if you will, is still so focused on the idea that our youth are broken and inadequate, let's fix them. Well, that's really a very outdated mental model. And fortunately, there are many youth employment nonprofits who've gone way past that and are working as a coalition to execute the new mentality, as well as trying to change others, the mentality of others. And so as you can see, in terms of where we collaborate in a very similar fashion, if what we're trying to do is just change one-off encounters and experiences, most of the time you can collaborate. You don't need collaboration. You can drive that change on your own. But as you start moving down the layers for deeper, more permanent change, it becomes harder and harder. And as you move towards the bottom, it's impossible to make any kind of lasting change without partnership. And so that brings me to finally, enough of me talking, back to our guests, right? That this is why I want to collaborate. And the important question now is, how do you collaborate when you're trying to make changes like this? So fortunately for us, our guests today, they've all been collaborating to change things at all of these deeper, more significant layers. So without further ado, what I'd love to do is just begin the conversation. We're going to start off with a conversation, a bit of a high-level overview of the projects that Sandy and Sahar are working on, and then we're going to get them to share with us a bit more deeper insights around how collaboration was critical to their success, who their stakeholders were, and how their stakeholders contributed to that, and then to share with us a bit of reflection on what they would do differently. So I'm going to begin first with Sahar. If you would like to just briefly share with us again yourself, your organization, the project that you want to share with us today, and how collaboration was important for it.
Yeah, thanks so much, Jerry. Well, I'll just quickly say that how interesting that we've also been using the FSG systems change framework that you just mentioned. So lots of great connections there. So yes, my name is Sahar Vermaziari. I am the director of the East Scarborough Storefront. I always think it's really important for us to know each other in terms of, collaboration. Relationships are really important. So just to share that I came to Canada as a refugee over 30 years ago. I live on the lands of the Michsageek, specifically the closest band closest to me is Chippewas of Georgina Island. And the East Scarborough Storefront is a backbone community organization, which means that we work to strengthen the entire community ecosystem by using an approach that we've coined the connected community approach. This is a set of principles and ways of working, and it's really all about relationships and collaboration and the principles and values that lead us in a good way to engage with this. And because we facilitate connections, we mobilize knowledge and coordinate community-wide strategies, and we do a lot of developing, nurturing, and weaving of networks, we really, collaboration is key to our work. We don't actually do anything without collaboration, without partnerships. And we know that, just going back to what you were saying, Jerry, in terms of why we collaborate, I would say, the last three reasons you had there are really why we collaborate. We know that we cannot solve these complex societal issues ourselves, these systemic issues. And we really believe in collective wisdom. And that is one of the keys to the connected community approach is, collaborating across the community, because we all have wisdom and knowledge and experience and expertise to bring to the table. And we really believe strongly in that we are not going to be able to, no one, not just us, no one entity, organization is going to be able to solve these issues, but it's really about coming together as a system to really think as an ecosystem, because we are interconnected. And so, yeah, for us, it very much, collaboration is critical and crucial to what we do. And we don't exist without our partners and the folks that we collaborate with. So I'll pause there. I think we'll have lots of other opportunities to talk, so I'll pass it over to Sandy.
Yeah, thank you. So same question, Sandy. Tell us a little bit about who you are, your organization, your project. How important was collaboration to your project?
Yeah, sure thing. So my name is Sandy Lee. I'm the Senior Project Manager with the Drone Transport Initiative. I work with UBC Faculty of Medicine. Before I start, I do want to recognize that I am living and playing and raised on the unceded territories of the Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and the Musqueam Nations. I'm a first-generation immigrant born in Hong Kong and really thankful to be here. And I think the recognition around our work is acknowledging that we are working with rural communities, and one of our main community that we work with is Stilatin First Nation and the village of Fraser Lake, and being able to work with communities closely really allowed us to identify what are the needs and what are some wicked problems that we need to solve in the rural context. And I think like our project, which is utilizing drones to transport medical supplies in rural remote communities, it's a 12-month demonstration project. And the purpose is acknowledging that there are virtual care that allows people to access healthcare in their own homes. However, what about accessing their medication? What about accessing lab specimen and all those other pieces that are critical to a patient's journey to getting their diagnosis, getting their treatment, and maintaining their well-being. And so when we're working on this project, we've heard from communities all these very impactful stories of not only just like the challenges in access, but also intergenerational trauma, just like discomfort with the institutions or systems because of past experiences with the 60 scoop and all these other things that leaves a mark on people. And so I think like working on a project like this and being embedded in specific communities really allowed us to dive very deep into the system that we're within and how we can identify ways to bridge these gaps, as well as like also these human interactions that also influence people in interacting with the system itself.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. Yeah. And yeah, exactly why I'm so excited to hear more. Let's continue with Sahar. Tell us a little bit more, in the project that you want to, in this project that you're sharing with us. Who are your main stakeholders, and what role did they play? How are they important to the success of the project? And along with that, what do you think was most crucial in growing and maintaining trust with them?
Yeah. So I'm going to mainly be talking about our local food system work. I think given, the questions kind of have a bit of a continuation, I think it's best for me to just stick to one project. And so at the beginning of the pandemic, the storefront, we did some things around work. You can see in my background, my virtual background is actually our community garden. So we had a community garden, residents had plots, so they were able to access fresh food. If you know anything about Scarborough, you'll know that it's a bit of like a food desert. It's a service desert. There isn't, we're certainly underserved in terms of resources. And so we also have a commercial kitchen that residents and our partners would be able to use. But that was all that we did around food. We didn't do anything else. We were not a food organization. And local grassroots groups that we work with, local residents that we work with, came to us and said, people are hungry. Our neighbors are not able to get out of their homes. There are seniors who are afraid that they're going to, get sick, and so they're not leaving their homes. And we need to figure out how to feed them. And it was really interesting in that, as an organization, you kind of do this thing of like, well, that's not really our mission. What's our role here? And what do we do? And we're in our heads. Meanwhile, the residents are going, people are hungry. We need to figure this out. So it happened in very much a, that emergence, urgent kind of piece was there. And we basically said, we know that one of our roles is to support residents. So residents want to do this. We got to figure out how to do it. So we figured out how to, even during lockdowns and such, keep our commercial kitchen open, support residents with staffing to come in and figure out who has rescued food. So figuring out the resourcing piece. And so we were also working with other food organizations. We were working with local businesses who were providing in-kind donations of food and things like that. But really, I'm going to focus on the grassroots leaders here because I think a lot of folks, when we talk about collaboration and partnership, what they think about institution to institution or organization to organization. And in this case, the dynamics are different. How you do the work, the collaboration is different when it's local residents and grassroots leaders. And in our case, these were the folks who were actually doing the cooking and distributing the food, and they were doing the work we were supporting. And so the project would not exist without them. And so it was of utmost importance for us to collaborate and figure out how to do this really quickly. And working with them was going to be the only way that we're going to be able to have this impact, because we're not a food organization. There's no one in our staff that does food work. You know, it's not something that we had done. And we weren't about to jump into it in the middle of the pandemic to try to figure it out. And so it really was very, very important that we build trust and work with residents. And we were able to do that. Part of it was because, you know, being a backbone community organization, we had always been building these relationships and the trust. So it wasn't suddenly, you know, in an emergency that you have to kind of do this from scratch, which we're very thankful for. We always knew we had the, you know, the foresight to kind of know you need to build these relationships, because the community will experience shocks. And when we do, we are a more resilient, stronger community when we have those, the social connection and the social capital already built. And part of why the, you know, the project was very successful was because grassroots leaders were part of it. They had the trust of the community. So they knew that, you know, when we were saying to folks, you're able to access food here, they trusted that, because it was really, that message was coming from their peers, was coming from their neighbors, and that was really, really important. We actually just last Friday, the 3 staff who have been supporting this initiative and have been working with grassroots leaders were recognized by the Bayana Awards in United Way as you know, leaders in this work. And so we were very, very excited about that too. So I think that was the other piece, was there are staff, but they're still stakeholders, right? And they had to also play a role in convincing the organization, because they were the closest to these grassroots leaders and saying, we need to do something. So it was definitely, the trust had to be built along among many different groups. So the grassroots themselves, the staff who were working with the grassroots leaders, and then leadership working with the staff. So there had to be trust all the way through for us to be able to do the work that we did.
Beautiful, thank you. And so we'll now turn the spotlight on to Sandy, who will share with us a very different story, but I think it has many similar elements as well. Who were your stakeholders, Sandy, and how was the work, the collaboration with them important and crucial to your success? And along with that, what do you think were the key things that you did in growing and maintaining trust with them?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think definitely there's been so many shared similarities with Sahara's stories. And for our project, we could not have done it without the nation and the local municipality. And I think I was very grateful to be part of a project where the communities were involved at the very beginning. They were involved from like the inception of the project to the planning to like identifying the vision of the project itself. And as you may, like I would assume that many people would be guessing like what is the Faculty of Medicine doing in delivering health services in rural communities? And I think as a Faculty of Medicine, I work very closely with our executive sponsor, the Vice Dean of Health Engagement. And we also have our rural health chair, who's Dr. John Polovich, and he's been a practicing physician in the First Nation community that we're working with for 3 decades. And so we have 2 very committed leaders that have both the commitment of the health system, being able to engage the right health system partners, as well as like a local champion that has the existing trust of the local communities. And with their leadership and their commitment to the project, we were able to bring in such a broad array of partners. We were able to bring in the communities, as I mentioned, but as well as the regional health authorities. There are the First Nations Health Authority as a sponsor of the project. We also engage with Canadian-wide organizations, and as well, we're able to engage even the regulators like Transport Canada to participate in some of the work that we're doing. And so our stakeholders was really broad, but I think it was a strength of our project is that we're really embedded in the leadership of the local nations and being community-led, nation-driven in terms of the mission and also every step of the project. And a big part of that is going into this project with a bit of a open-mindedness, knowing that the project scope that we initially planned for is relatively small. Our initial scope was to only transport surrogate items, so like items that mimic medical goods. But as we kind of proceed into this 12-month project, we were able to hear from communities the importance of us actually transporting actual goods and the importance of how much more we can gain out of these partnerships that we've established throughout this work. To transport actual goods. And so by the end of our project, we began transporting medication to community members. We were going through the provincial accreditation program to transport lab specimens, and also identified an array of potential future next steps for the project. And all of that is because we were just working with our stakeholders and listening and incorporating and modifying our plans as we move forward.
Yeah. That's beautiful. I want to probe a little bit more, Sandy, because you also shared with me a very interesting side story, which I think is probably a very important aspect of the story, which is that as part of this project, your team was very insistent on engaging the local community and hiring and training in the local communities, in these local rural communities as well. Can you share a little bit more about that and how it became part of an important part of the success?
Yeah, for sure. And so I think taking leadership from the nation and acknowledging that it's really important to focus on the wellness of the whole community, and wellness not just in health, but also like economic development, in employment opportunities, in mental health, and all these different ways. Our project tried to embody those values through how we, as what Jerry had said, we focused on hiring local community members. We focused on, even when we're just procuring items or services, and everything was hired locally just to expand the capacity within the community. And as a 12-month project, in Stillatin First Nation, there's only about 200 people living on the reserve. And then in the village of Fraser Lake, there's about 1,000 or so residents. And if you can imagine, like in a community of those sizes, like finding folks that are available to be hired for a 12-month project, the pool is rather limited, and a big part of our project is meeting people where they're at, and that might mean we're working with people to build out their computer skills, learn how to teach them and work with them to build confidence in sending out emails, putting attachments in, and there's all these small things that I think build trust in the relationship we have. And through those trusts of these local people that we hire, they also become champions within the community that can speak to the value that we embody as a project, and also the value of the work that we're doing as a project.
That's beautiful. And Sahar, I know something similar like this happened in your project too, right? And trust is such an important thing with your grassroots leaders, but for them to trust you, they have to see that you are doing what you say you're doing for their community and not just face value with them. Not only that, you spoke with me about how important it is to balance that power dynamics. Can you share more?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I was just going to comment on what Sandy said too before I jump into that. You made me think, Sandy, about building capacity and how important that is, especially when you're working with residents and grassroots leaders. And that's something that we've had to do as well. And I think, again, it's looking at this holistically and in the long term, right? We had been doing this kind of work and building capacity because we knew, again, shocks are going to happen in the community. And so we also have, a different part of our, a different project of our organization, a service hub, and people come and use computers, and we teach them how to do all of those things, like you said, attach things, and how do you send an email. So I just wanted to mention that all of those pieces all come into play once something happens and you need to mobilize quickly. And yeah, in terms of the power dynamics, Jerry, it was in terms of sustaining and building the trust, that was so key. We had to really be explicit in calling out some of these tensions. These residents weren't getting paid to do that work. Our staff were and are. The other piece was, how do we fund this? And funders don't typically, they don't fund these grassroots kind of things. It has to be through a qualified donee. And when that happens, the tension is, we're an organization where we have accountabilities to our funders. We have all these kinds of bureaucracies and things that we have to manage. And residents are just thinking about the bottom line of I need to get my neighbor's food. And so trying to figure out the balance of what is it that they need to know in order to understand our realities and our really the framework within which we have to exist and do our work, while at the same time not bogging them down, right? Again, they are not getting paid, so they don't have to be thinking about these things. And that was a piece in terms of explain to folks what happens when you get this funding. Well, we have to figure out the admin portions and the overhead, and then and even writing in funding for honoraria, and we do resident contracts. We make use of that in our work, and there's been a shift in terms of the openness to that. I think maybe 5 to 10 years ago, it was not something you wrote into funding budgets because it was not a thing that you did, and we figured out different ways to provide these short term. And Sandy, for you, maybe 12 months. For us, sometimes it's 2 months. You're an outreach ambassador and you're going out and talking to people about this. Or for the folks who are doing the food work, we're constantly looking at how do we build in some kind of honoraria so that they are getting something to sustain them as they do this really important work. And so there's definitely tensions there. Stuff around trusteeing. We have been, we are an organization that's tried to do that, and we just find that there are so many power dynamics that are problematic, where we would normally be able to collaborate and build trusting relationships. Once you hold the dollars and you are the holder of the purse strings, you become a completely different entity. And we have to then start holding them accountable for what we need them to do, rather than what the community actually wants to do, what the residents want to do. And so we've really not done that. But I think there's a tension there where grassroots groups will come to us and say, we want you to be our trustee, because then we can access these funds. And so there's this tension. We are still working within it. We don't have any the answers, but that's definitely something to pay attention to as you work with grassroots groups. Is anytime money is on the table, and it's not just for grassroots, it's for anyone, right? We know things get messy and dicey, and anytime there's money at play, and the dynamics can definitely shift because of that. And so that's something that we pay really close attention to. And even when we do resident contracts, we have to be really clear about, you're getting paid to do this specific thing. And then people have multiple roles. Right, so we have staff who are actually residents. in the community. And then we have residents who become, who get paid for a little while, but then they're also doing other things. And so it can get really, really messy and tricky. And so, I know we're not quite there yet, so I won't jump into it just yet, but just there are some lessons learned in terms of what we might do differently in the future, and things that we kind of, looking back might have wanted to do differently.
Absolutely, yeah. And so I do want to do at this point invite the audience, if you have any questions, to type it into either the Q&A, or if you are not able to access the Q&A, then just type it into the chat room, and we'll come back to those questions. And so with that, I'd love to then now tap you for that important question. Knowing what you know now, having done your project up till now, in hindsight, what would you do differently in the way you collaborate? Let's start with Sandy.
Yeah, so I would say that for us, building trust was around having the nation invite us into this work and allowing us to do this work. As I mentioned before, we could not have done this without the nation's support. And there were a lot of pieces where it was a lot of communications, a lot of engaging community, working through our local champions and liaisons to guide us how to reach the community members. Also looking at reaching the community as a whole, that would be working with the local youth, with the local school district. And so then we aren't replicating the mistakes research organizations have done in the past and being helicopter researchers, but rather looking at it as a whole in building up the community. And in hindsight, I think our project was developed at the height of COVID-19. It was a quite uncertain time, and we didn't know whether we can do any in-person gathering. We didn't know what any of the restrictions would look like. At that time, flight wasn't even as broadly, people weren't even traveling much, and the community was shut down. Many First Nations in BC decided to restrict traveling into the community to protect their members. And so in hindsight, a part of it was really not being thoughtful enough around our budgeting for community events. I think our assumption was a lot of that would be happening online, which in my experience was it doesn't provide enough depth for community members to build trust and share truthfully about what their needs are and what they're looking forward to and what they would like out of the project. Another piece is also around budgeting, is around just making information accessible. I think we're working with population that aren't going to read a long report. They're not going to read even a 2-pager of what we're writing about what we're doing. And so we, in retrospect, after the project was initiated, we had to find additional funding to develop videos, to develop content, so then it's shareable and more accessible to the people that we're working with. And so I think in terms of collaboration, I kind of wish that we had in mind in greater, I think there's hosting community events can be expensive and can be very time consuming at the same time, because we don't want to draw people away from the meaningful work that they are already doing. People in the community are wearing so many hats already. We don't want to add to their burden. And so we need to take on that responsibility. And that takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of money and a lot of effort to host these events. But I think ultimately it does create an atmosphere of trust in the work that we do. And it becomes reciprocal, where we're able to hear better, hear from people around what is on their mind and what are problems that they are experiencing and how we can identify better ways to address it.
Thank you. And to you, Sahar, I know
Yeah.
things, you've done a lot of right things, but when we talk, you also had a lot
Oh,
of
we also do a
hindsight.
lot of wrong things too, for sure. Yeah, and I think, again, I think the interesting piece here and the commonality between the two projects, Sandy's, is again the fact that this happened during the pandemic, and like there were so many things up in the air. Like just as an organization, as a human being, you walk and you're like, do I work in my pajamas now? Is this what happens? Like, and like your children are everywhere. So like as a human being, you're doing this thing. And then as an organization, you're figuring out this thing. And then there are new and exciting things, but like new things that you have to be doing that are mind bending. So yeah, there's definitely, things that we could have done differently. I think one piece is, again, to speak to like the urgent and emergent nature of the collaboration, I'm not sure if we could have done it intentionally, because the way that it came about was an urgent, emergent thing. And so we couldn't really do let's think about like our roles and like, what are some of the risks here? What are some of the pitfalls that we might not, and talk about what are the values and principles that we want to ensure, lead this work. And thankfully, again, the connected community approach, something that we've embedded within our community and our organization, was there for us. That was a big piece of like, we still have these principles and values that we work and live by. But I think one of the pieces that we would have, it would have been great to make the connection earlier was, and I have to share a little bit of context. So East Scarborough is one of the most diverse communities in all of Canada, actually. We have a robust and vibrant Black community. Outside of downtown Toronto, Scarborough has the highest number of Indigenous folks living here. And it's a community where upwards of 50% of folks are we're not born in Canada. And so when George Floyd's murder happened, there was a lot of folks grappling with what this meant. And as an organization, we've always had an equity lens, but we didn't have an explicit addressing anti-Black racism lens and an anti-racist lens. And so the organization was working on what does this mean for us? And, again, a lot of folks probably thought, storefront, they're all equity minded and it's all good, but we had to really look and be like, no, we have learnings to do internally before we say anything to anyone externally. And I think connecting the work that we were doing around addressing anti-Black racism, both, in our organization and community, connecting it to the food work we were doing, because there's such a huge connection around food insecurity and anti-racism or racism and food insecurity, and bringing a food sovereignty lens. All of that kind of came out through lots of meetings and discussions and kind of making sense of all of this. And I think had we made that connection a bit sooner, I think there could have been some more mobilizing and kind of like mobilizing of knowledge and thinking through actions and connecting those two pieces of our work more explicitly. We now have that understanding, but it took, a couple of years for us to get there. We were doing this work, and we were kind of chugging along, and they suddenly started to merge, and we're like, oh, right. So I think that's something, looking back, that I think would have been really important, because again, the folks that we're collaborating with, the grassroots leaders, are mostly Black folks. And so it would have been really important to make that connection. And I think it would have built further trust. And I think it would have moved our project forward in a different way, and perhaps in a more accelerated way. Yeah, so I think those are the pieces that, looking back, I think it would be great, if we had that site at that point to incorporate it into the food project.
Yeah, and that actually reminds me of a short conversation, a short part of the conversation I had with Sandy, which, hearing about anecdotal appreciation of the project, how it's helping them, etc. And for Sahar, I'm sure your staff working with these Black grassroots leaders would have heard grumblings of these racism that they're experiencing.
Mm-hmm.
And I think as nonprofit, as a nonprofit community together, we all need to get a lot better at sensing and collecting and making sense of this information that comes straight from our clients before it becomes a big deal in our face. Right? And that's something that all of us together need to get a lot better at if we truly want to collaborate with our community, to not just wait till it's a workshop or a town hall to hear, but rather having these channels there all the time.
Yeah, and I'll just say, take it one step further, Jerry, and say, we actually need resourcing for that.
Yes.
You and I had a conversation about, we're in this hamster wheel of trying to get the funding that we need to do the work that needs to get done. And the important forward-looking work of looking at what the community, you're hearing from the community, what your data is telling you, and making sense of it and doing something based off of that sense making is something that, a lot of not-for-profits don't have the capacity to do. We just did a session last week with our management team, and we had to squeeze it in between like 2 weeks of proposals and report deadlines. So as important as it is, it's not funded, it's not resourced, and it's not the system doesn't support it.
Yeah, there you go. I think we might have a couple of questions. Let me pass it over to Naomi. Yeah.
Jerry, amazing. Thank you so much. And thank you for what has been a fabulous discussion. We do have time for a question, and we do have a question to share back to all of you. So this is from Murray, and it was shared in the Q&A. And they're wondering if you have been able to engage at the collaborative level with municipal or Indigenous governments, especially related to finance and to policy. So really, like as an NGO collaborating on policy level with government, is there a strategy? What's your experience been like? If yes.
I can go first. I think like with the different levels of organizations that we work with. So I come from I did my master's in public policy and have worked in the provincial level and also worked with the health authorities. And each of these organizations have a slightly different structure. And that's where I think these identifying those liaisons that are available to support you in moving the agenda forward or the dial forward for the project is really important. With the First Nation community that we work with, they have their own policies around like what the protocols are. There's even cultural practices, protocols that changes from nation to nation. And so that's where like the very specific community involvement is so critical from the very beginning. And then from a municipal level, they also have a different, like we work with the village of Fraser Lake, and they, even though they're just across the lake from Stillatin First Nation, their policies are different, and their procurement policies are different. And within our organization as University of British Columbia, we also have our own internal processes. And there were quite a number of times where there are conflicts between our procurement policies and what is truly available in the rural context. And so to provide an example, to operate a drone project, we needed ban and council resolution and the municipal and mayor council approval to utilize their land. And then once we have those approvals, we needed then to construct the site. We had to construct the landing site. That means procuring like actual products, electrician, and all these contractors. But you're in a rural context where maybe there's just one company that offers that one service, and otherwise like there's maybe a few more in Prince George that's 2 hours drive out, but none of them would come out to do the service for you. And so it won't fulfill our internal procurement policies. But like realistically, it's also not right for us to force force the local municipality to identify other companies that wouldn't work with them. And so there were quite a bit of areas where we needed to operate in a flexible space. And then when it came to like engaging government, there's, I think, like a benefit that I am able to experience in this project is working with our sponsors who have a number of platform and steering committees and all these very influential groups that they are able to work with, and they are very well connected into different levels of health authorities and are able to be at certain tables that a project manager would not be. And so, but through that, it really came down to like identifying the avenues that our executive sponsors can work through to talk to these levels of government. And then sharing our information has been so influential in bringing in Transport Canada to participate in our work and being able to just share like what are some rural contexts that are different than an urban context when it came to operating drones, when it came to the need of this technology and how like policies and regulations can influence like access in these forms. And so I think there's so many layers to that, but I think I'm definitely very grateful of the structure of our project and the people that are involved, because without these people, we weren't able to move forward.
Yeah, and with Sahar, you have to figure all of this out on your own.
Yeah. I mean, we definitely have we have funding from the City of Toronto, and so that's definitely a big support, and they do support our grassroots leadership work. But I think this one, you know, it's a bit of a different kind of project in that there wasn't necessarily, and we're still in the beginning processes. So we are thinking about like the next steps are, you know, the advocacy pieces, like what needs to actually shift in the systems for some of these sticky issues that we have impacting the community. And I think that's when we might be working, you know, with more institutional players, including municipalities. Yeah, so I'll pause there, and I know there might be other questions, and I'm looking at the time, so I don't want to say too much more.
Those were really fabulous answers, so thank you both. We do have one more question. We are just past 2 o'clock, but if you are able to give us an answer. So from Alice in the chat, Alice, when your projects don't necessarily allow for good monitoring for success, you know, and this can be across different types of projects and areas. So how do we fix this, or what are your thoughts on sustainability in that regard?
Let me take a step.
Yeah, tree planting.
Yeah, please, whoever.
Yeah, let me take a step at that. I think without knowing the specifics, I think the period of your project versus what you set as your success indicator, and the feasibility and viability of those things, they all come into play. At least in the project I've been involved with or advise on, the number one thing that we talk about is you need to set goals, especially with shorter term projects, like the 3 month, 6 month, 1 year project. You absolutely have to set measurable goals. Otherwise, that time will pass very quickly, and you wouldn't even you feel like you haven't achieved anything. But at the same time, you do need to set very realistic goals, very realistic targets. And then the next bit of it is, you know, unless you are also a transient organization, a temporary organization that only exists for the purpose of the project, and if that's the case, then you need to think long and hard about why you're doing that project and what you're trying to accomplish. But in most cases, you are a longer term organization. And so this project that you do, this 1 year project you do, is one in a series. And so in the work that I've done, the key to it is then positioning that particular initiative, be it three months or 1 year. How is that part of your overall roadmap? How does it contribute to your overall roadmap, your overall strategy, your overall theory of change? What role does it play? And if you're able to position it, the way you talk about success will often become a lot more obvious. Now, the next bind that you'll be in is what Sahar mentioned earlier, right? Just because you feel you've got the right success indicator doesn't mean your funder will agree with you. So that becomes a longer conversation with your funder to figure that piece out, to make sure that you're not creating very, very expensive monitoring and data collection mechanism for a short project, something that's practical, that's reasonable, etc., that will satisfy both your own internal monitoring and your funder monitoring. Yeah, that's mine.
Can I add one thing? I think that what you said was great, Jerry. I would just add one of the things that we've been working on that I think has been helpful is we talk about signs and signals of change.
Yeah. Yes.
And it's those early, like, this could be something, right? And I think it'll work really well with your tree planting metaphor. If it's a seed, So yeah, we talk about that. And I think, again, if you're looking at systems change, we know systems change takes a long time.
Yeah.
And 1 year, even 10, 20 years is often not enough, but certainly 1 year wouldn't be. But if you looked at the FSG framework for systems change and talked about signs and signals that each of those levers are being changed. So what's a sign and signal that a policy has changed? What's a sign and signal that some mindset shifts have happened as like early indicators? I think that would be something that might then, hopefully your funder might be excited about finding out more and fund you for subsequent years.
Yeah, and the good news is that a lot of funders, government funders especially, and some foundation funders are become a lot more aware of the importance of longer-term measurement, and will often fund you to measure, say, 1 year after the project is completed. Right? So the gap is longer. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think like everybody else had touched it very well in terms of like a lot of system level changes. Often I think these short-term projects unpack what those system issues are, and without this 12-month project, we probably would not have gathered all these lessons learned around what needs to be done in terms of like a planning analysis type of way before we can move into the next phase of the work.
Yeah.
And some of that may appear like there's no work happening in the community, but back to the tree analogy, it's when the roots are being developed, and that's when the meaningful change actually is able to be impactful.
Yeah. Awesome.
Thank you all. And I don't know if anyone wanted to take a moment for a final word. If so,
as we move to close now, just want to bring the screen back on again. Thank you so much, Sahar, Sandy, for sharing your experiences and your insights. Just want to give it to you now for just one last word. What would you want the participants today to walk away with? What would you like them to remember?
I think I would just say that, collaboration isn't easy, as you said, Jerry, but we certainly believe that every single collaboration has been worth it. And we have furthered our work, our mission, and, have been able to get at that systems level change, which we couldn't have done alone. So I think it's really important. And if you can, start with why. Why are you at the table together? Start with principles. What are you all committed to? I think those are the two best, pieces of advice I've ever received and kind of seen play out positively when it comes to partnerships and collaboration. Start with why and start with principles.
Wonderful. Sandy?
I second everything Sahar has already said. I think another piece is to see those signals and signs. Often it really requires cultivating an emotionally safe space for all the different teams and parties to be involved in the work. And so I find that being very mindful of these different, like in our project, we have these high-level system stakeholders that have their own conversations and their own develops emotional safety groups, but there's also these on the ground community members that are operating our project that are seeing what is going wrong, and also cultivating those close relationship to hear what is happening. And that's when the marrying those two together is when we're able to identify the successes.
Wonderful. Well, thank you very, very much. I hope this was as interesting and valuable for me as it was for all the audiences today. That I'll pass it back to is it back to Naomi or Gabriella? Yeah.
That's great. Yeah, talks back to me is fabulous. Thank you so much, Jerry. So yes, we have run out of time. So we are gonna start to wrap up the session. If you don't mind sticking with us for just a couple more minutes. Again, just thank you, Jerry, for hosting such a wonderful session, and to Sahar and Sandy for joining in. Thank you for all you shared, for all you brought to the session today, all of the insights. We're always immensely grateful for the time taken by all of our partners and all of the organizations and projects that we work with for coming and joining. So thank you again, and for sharing your stories. Now to the audience, and with the purpose of continuing to learn and improve these sessions, it would be great if you could respond to a short survey to gather some feedback. We will share the English and French links to the survey in the chat, and we will also share them in a follow-up email. We promise it will only take you about less than 3 minutes to respond, and it really helps us in the process of developing more of these sessions. I also did want to say a thank you to the questions that were shared. I did see that there were some follow-up comments, and we will try to address them and send them in the appropriate way after the fact and get back to you. So thank you for sharing all of those. And additionally, and this is our last technical note before I pass it to Gabriella for some final things, we just want to let you know that this session has been recorded, and we will send a follow-up with the link for their session both in French and English, so that you can share it with other colleagues or reference back to it in the future. So thank you again. On that note, I'm going to pass it to Gabriella, who has just some final remarks for our last Mobilizer session of the year. So thank you.
Thank you, Naomi.
You're back on mute, Gabriella.
Thank you. Last session of the year and still on mute. Thank you, all of you, Jerry, Sahar, Sandy. This has been an absolute pleasure to listen to you and to learn from your experiences. Before closing, we just wanted to take 1 minute to celebrate with you everything that we have achieved together. It's kind of crazy, but this is the last mob session of the year. And there's a lot that has happened this year. So we just wanted to take 1 minute to take a deep breath together. 2022 has been a very special year for all of us. It's been a year full of joy and learning, and lots has happened in this community of practice. We have hosted 6 Mobilizer sessions like the one we experienced today that have covered a very diverse range of topics that went from winter activations, digital resilience, the living with it era, learning and evaluation. And in these sessions, we've been joined by 16 project leads like Sandy and Sahar from across the country who have shared with us their questions, failures, stories, strategies, successes, and we are very thankful for that. Furthermore, this year has been a special year because we've launched Canada's placemaking community website, which is a knowledge and a happening hub for anyone who wants to dive deeper into community engagement and into placemaking across the country. The site has received over 1,000 visits since we launched in September, which makes us very, very excited and happy. And with the launch of the website, we have also started a newsletter, which hopefully will provide an opportunity for you to get a digest of the stories and the happenings across the country. If you want to make sure that any of your stories are there, please let us know, because that space is for you. And finally, we have also continued with our mentorship program. We have hosted 2 mentorship cohorts with 28 projects working with our mentors, one of whom is Jerry, and 11 small group discussions that have invited more than 60 projects to get to know each other and to slowly start building these relationships and connective tissue across the country. So I think I can speak on behalf of the Healthy Communities Initiative team at the Canadian Urban Institute, but also at Community Foundations of Canada and all our partners in saying that we are closing this year full of gratitude and with lots of ideas and excitement for the year ahead. So we hope that you all get a good opportunity to rest and to enjoy this beautiful cold weather. And we just want to make sure that you stay tuned and that we will see each other in 2023. So have a lovely break and thank you all. Take care.